Is it okay to be angry at God? Or is it sinful? If you're angry with God, is that a lack of faith? I'm going to point to a couple of scriptures in the Psalms and in Job and tell a personal story to illustrate what I think is going on with this. But I want to start with part of the answer instead of just leaving you hanging. Can we gripe at, yell at, complain, and rail against someone who doesn't exist? It's impossible to argue with God, complain against God, tell him exactly what you think, rail against him if you don't think he's there. Complaint, aggravation, even accusation sometimes is actually the faithful response. And the reason that I believe that is true comes from the book of Psalms. Read Psalm 44, read Psalm 88. They are mad at God. Where is he? What's going on? Why are you sleeping? Why don't you wake up? We're suffering down here. We didn't do anything wrong. We kept your covenant. And now we're being defeated in battle. Now the enemy is rejoicing over us, but we didn't do anything wrong. Where are you at? And why are you treating us this way, God? Well, you don't talk to someone who you don't think exists like that. Or take the book of Job. Read Job 19. Read Job chapter 30. And read all the things that Job said against God, taking him to court. You're in the wrong, God. What in the world are you doing? You got this thing all wrong. Is that faithful language to tell God that he's doing it wrong? Is it faithful language in the Psalms to ask why God doesn't wake up and do something, that he's asleep at the wheel? Does that sound like faithful language? No, it doesn't sound like faithful language. So that's why we have this question. Is it okay to rail against God, to bring accusation against him, and still be faithful? Part of the answer to that, in a general sense, comes from the book of Psalms. These are the inspired scriptures. These are the people of God, people close to God's own heart, who are pouring out their honest emotions to a God who they firmly believe exists, cares, and can and will do something. It's a helpless person, a hopeless person, a person who has no faith in the other party, who stops trying. Think about a marriage or a relationship. One of the biggest warning signs, a big red flag in marriage, is when you stop arguing because you've given up on there being any progress. You are that hopeless. It's the hopeful person who pushes back. It's the hopeful person who tries. And I'm not advocating for abusive behavior. I'm not advocating for yelling or screaming or intense arguing, but I'm just saying that it is actually an act of faith to try. It may be actually an act of faithlessness that says, well, we are just giving up over here. There's no sense in asking. There's no more sense in bringing it up. God doesn't exist. He's not there. Might be what someone thinks, but that's not what you get in the Psalms. What you get in the Psalms is a desperate plea for the one who you know is there, who can do something, who you know is powerful, who you know is in covenant with you, for him to come and do what he promised he would do. That's faithfulness. That's faith. It's allegiance to him. We're not crying out to the other gods. We're not looking to alternatives. We're taking it to you, God. Brutal and transparent, authentic and honest. Here's where we're at. Deal with it. Because he can. Or read the book of Job once again. Job 19 and Job 30. Read all these things that Job said against God, and then turn to the end of the book of Job and read Job 42, 7 through 9. In Job 42, 7 through 9, God turns against one of Job's friends. And God says to him, of all this garbage that you've uttered over the last few days and weeks, or however long this has been, you have not spoken truthfully of me, he says to his friend. Well, you know what? Neither had Job. Job said all kinds of stuff. Go back and read those chapters for you to see for yourself. Does that sound like Job spoke truthfully of God? Well, no. It doesn't sound like he spoke truthfully of God. But Job spoke as best he knew to speak of God given his circumstances. And again, he was crying out to a God who he believed firmly existed, who cared, and who could actually do something about his predicament. Now, I believe that's actually faith. And I believe it's truly astounding that at the end of the book of Job, God says, Job was faithful to me, he spoke truthfully of me, etc. Because when you read that stuff, it sure doesn't feel like it. So when you and I are in these situations and we want to speak our mind to God, it does not feel faithful. It does not feel truthful or honest, but it's where we're at. And God is big enough to take it. He can handle it. He's seen it all before, as we are actually speaking words of faithfulness to him, because we're saying, we are in this together. Why aren't you helping? What's going on? And there's always more going on behind the scenes than we know of what God is doing or why he allows what he allows. I'm going to have a follow-up video to this one. We're going to talk about that. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Let's lay that out here in the next video. And so I hope you'll check that out. So here's a personal story for me. There's been times in my life when I've been upset with God. One time in particular that I was very angry with God. My wife and I had been married for several years. We decided it was time to start a family. We're pregnant with our first baby and praying for the health of this child, the well-being, the future, and all this for this child. And we had a miscarriage. And I'd never been through that before. You hear someone has a miscarriage as a young person in your teens and youth group and stuff growing up. It's like, oh, that's kind of sad, but you don't really think much about it. But when you go through it, it's agonizing. It is horrible. It's one of the worst things that you can possibly go through. And one of the things that really troubled me about it was, okay, God, if you took my life, I know I've messed up enough that that's probably warranted, that's one way to think about it. But we could talk about that in a little bit more depth as to whether or not that's fair. Why this baby? And why babies in general? Why childhood leukemia? If there was anyone who didn't deserve this ever, it's this baby, right? There's been nothing done wrong. Why do you allow suffering like this? Why do you allow such pain? Why do you allow such heartache with the innocent of the innocents? I'm not a Calvinist. I don't believe in, sinful from conception or birth. We choose to sin. And so that really rattled me. I was really mad at God there for a while. And I knew intellectually that God can work good things from that, Romans 8:28, okay, certainly. And it took me a long time to find some solace. And what finally dawned on me that actually helped me through that was I realized one day that God is not happy about sin, and I'm not talking about the baby, I'm just talking about in general. God is not happy about death. Death, 1 Corinthians 15, is an enemy that God is defeating. Sin and death go together. Illness, sickness, pain, the whole brokenness of the system is not something God is happy about. It's actually something he's quite, in a sense, upset about because it's his enemy and he is seeking through resurrection, which ultimately will be solved in the coming of Jesus, that God is bringing resolution and solution and victory over what I'm so upset about. Why would God try to bring victory over something that he's not bothered by? So God is bothered by this on a scale possibly far greater than I could possibly imagine. And that made me feel tremendously better about God in this. Now, I don't understand always why he waits the way he waits or why he operates the way he operates. Sometimes you might think maybe there'd be a little easier path to the same destination, but I guess apparently there is not. So I say all these things to say, if you're mad at God, it's because you believe he exists. And the only reason you'd be mad at him is because what's happening in your mind seems as if it would be out of character with the way you think that God would operate given the same set of circumstances, given your circumstances. God knows more than we do. God's timing is different than ours. He sees the end from the beginning. You're going to have to hang in there. And if you got to keep making accusation just to have some kind of conversation with him, then continue to do that. But I'm going to tell you, don't get stuck there. In time, when you're ready, which takes different amounts of time for each of us, you will come through to the other side. And I believe that God can truly say that even in our difficulty, even in the hard and harsh words that we utter, and I'm not advocating being profane against God, although God can handle that as well, I think that we need to continue to talk to him, to continue to be honest. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't blush over it. Don't bury it in the sand. Take it to him exactly how you feel. Even use words from his own word if you need to. Where are you? Why are you sleeping? Why have you left us out here to die like this? When are you going to do something about it? Sounds an awful lot like faith to me. Maybe it does to you too. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button. Hit subscribe. Catch you later. Take care.